Mr McCaskill's referred to the view of the parole board, who did indeed say that Megrahi was a suitable candidate for release, largely on medical evidence, which I shall turn to later. But it was clear that this was simply advice to ministers. The final decision lay with them. The board also noted that no victim representations had been presented for consideration, and surely that is an opportunity which should have been given to the families of those who died. I have said that I believe the Justice Secretary had made his mind up a long time before he announced his decision. And on the 22nd of July, the papers show his officials discussing with Libyan officials a potential and timescale for compassionate release from Megrahi to Libya. But it was only on the 14th of August that a meeting took place with Strathclyde Police to discuss security implications of his being released on compassionate grounds but remaining in Scotland, where clearly conditions on his licence could be more rigorously enforced. But on that same date, officials advised that they had already prepared for the contingency that Megrahi would be supervised in Libya by East Renfrewshire Council. Far more effort seems to have gone into that than looking at alternatives in Scotland. And I point to what Strathclyde Police said, at least prior to the wholly inappropriate intervention in police matters of the First Minister's spokesman, that if a decision had been made to release al-Megrahi in Scotland, we would have provided whatever security was required. I think the Cabinet Secretary had a duty to look at all the options, but he simply wasn't interested in them, and I'm sure others will return to that point. There are also other questions of process. Why was Mr al-Megrahi sending belongings home weeks before the decision was apparently made? Who knew about this? There's also the issue of why important elements of the guidance on compassionate release do not appear to have been given much consideration. Crucially, it states the type of offence and a length of sentence outstanding form part of the criteria. Megrahi had 19 years left to serve of a sentence the Crown was appealing as unduly lenient. Did the Cabinet Secretary really take this fully into consideration? I turn to the medical advice the Cabinet Secretary received, or as the case appears to be, did not receive, in relation to Mr al-Megrahi's health. The Cabinet Secretary received the view of 5 doctors, 1 GP and 4 cancer specialists. How can we have any confidence in the decision reached by the Cabinet Secretary when 4 specialists were not willing to say that Mr al-Megrahi had less than 3 months to live, as Dr Fraser highlighted in his report? Indeed, a number of experts, including Professor Roger Kirby, a chairman of Prostate UK, have cast severe doubt on this assessment. Why was the caution expressed by 4 cancer specialists disregarded?
Tandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the member, and I thank him for taking the intervention, in all sincerity, can I ask him, hand in heart, these amendments put forward by the Labour Party and the other opposition parties, bearing in mind the Mace integrity, can I ask him if this has anything to do with al-Megrahi or even the Lockerbie victim, but more doing with political posturing of the worst kind?
Richard Baker.
That was not a pertinent question on the medical evidence to which I was referring, and frankly I just think was a load of nonsense. Why was further medical opinion on such a crucial issue not sought? Why was it the solitary opinion of a single GP which a Cabinet Secretary chose to base his decision on? We cannot be certain of how long Megrahi has left to him, but there is huge doubt over the 3-month prognosis to which the guidance on the decision and the Cabinet Secretary have referred. I think after the last one, I'm going to make some progress. Shortly after the meeting in Greenock Prison, it was the BBC who announced Megrahi would be released back to Libya in exactly the way events transpired a week later. Not this Parliament, told first, not more importantly in my view, the families of those who died, but a broadcaster. It meant that for a week we had speculation and counter-speculation over the decision, often coming from the Scottish Government itself, and naturally urgent representations and views on the matter both in the USA and Libya. If the Cabinet Secretary is confident he and his advisers were not responsible for this appalling breach of protocol, then he should have no misgivings about calling a leak inquiry to look into this matter. He is yet to do so. I urge the Cabinet Secretary to do so today, because it can only have made this a more difficult time for the families of the victims. It made the anger of the many who opposed this decision at home and abroad all the more acute when the leaks were finally confirmed and we had the sight of Mr al-Megrahi convicted 270 counts of murder by Scottish courts returning to Libya amid Saltires flying at Tripoli Airport.
Margaret MacDonald.
Will the members sign the motion that I've had in front of the Parliament demanding an independent inquiry for 3 weeks now?
Mr Baker.
I think inevitably this decision will be subject to further parliamentary scrutiny, and I'll certainly take that point on board. And I want to come now to the Mr McCaskill's statements in the prisoner transfer agreement, which he has given ample weight. The fact is the prisoner transfer agreement could never have been agreed anyway, because the Crown appeal against the leniency of Mr al-Megrahi's sentence was outstanding. His response earlier on simply didn't make sense. It may suit the Scottish Government to focus attention on this agreement, but it does a disservice to proper scrutiny in this Parliament. Whatever decision was made, it was always for Scottish ministers, and the decision which was made was for release on compassionate grounds. That was an issue for Scottish ministers alone. How much better it would have been if this application for compassionate release had simply been treated as any other, if the medical evidence, written representations and advice from the prison service had simply been gathered and a decision made on the basis of this information without fanfare and pre-announcement. But by the time the Cabinet Secretary made his announcement, it was inevitable there would be huge questions over his reasoning for making this decision. It was inevitable, given the leaks and speculation which had characterised the weeks leading up to it, that the response from those who disagreed with his decision would be all the more anguished, regrettable, avoidable and damaging for our country. But it was not simply the way the decision was made which hurt our international... yes, I will.
Cabinet Secretary.
Are you suggesting that I should not have considered the prisoner transfer application at all, despite representations from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that it was appropriate for it to proceed?
I think it's academic because the Crown appeal was ongoing. But it was not simply the way the decision which was made which hurt our international reputation. It was also the way it was announced too. Yes, many of us here are Christians. In Scotland, we have people of many faiths and none. But to suggest that the only compassionate action to take was to grant Mr al-Megrahi compassionate release to Libya was wrong. To suggest that the decision should be taken in a context that as a cancer sufferer, Mr al-Megrahi was being judged by a higher authority was bizarre and actually quite offensive. And to suggest that when he spoke that his characterisation of our justice system and his view of our national understanding of compassion was the only possible view was quite wrong. It is clear there are different views of this difficult decision in Scotland. I respect those with a different view from me, but it is also clear that the majority of Scots believe Mr McCaskill made the wrong decision. It was arrogance typical of this administration that the Cabinet Secretary presumed he could speak for all Scots on this matter when clearly he could not. He has failed to justify the decision he has made and account for the shambolic way he went about making it. Today, we will record that this Parliament cannot endorse a decision which was meant to be arrived at through due process, but instead came about through manipulation and mishandling. Scotland's Parliament today, I believe, will act to restore the reputation Scotland's Justice Secretary has done so much to damage. He has spoken for his government, for his party. He has not spoken for this Parliament or this country, and I move the amendment in my name.